The United Nations Development Program, corruption in Brazil amounts to 200 billion reais. That's $62 billion a year. Put another way, that's twice Brazil's 2014 health budget and 2.5 times its education budget. When President Dilma Rousseff ran for office, she announced her intention to use Brazil's future oil profits to help the economy and avoid corruption and mismanagement that have plagued other oil-rich countries in the developing world. Fast forward less than 3 months into her second term, the Brazilian president is facing massive protests as Petrobras, the state-run oil company, reels from a $3 billion bribery scandal, and Brazil's economy faces contraction for a second consecutive year. Later, we'll talk to several Brazilian scholars and a member of the protest movement, but we begin with the latest from Brazil and CCTV's Stephen Gibbs. And Stephen, give us an idea of how big these protests are.
Well, I think undoubtedly they were countrywide. Every single one of the 27 states across Brazil held a protest. In terms of the numbers, it's quite difficult to be specific. Take, for example, Sao Paulo, the financial capital here. The police put the number of protesters at 1 million. Others put it at about 250,000. But I think if you take the whole country, we're looking at 1 to 2 million people protesting. And that puts it right up there with the biggest ever anti-government protests in Brazilian history.
And Stephen, who are these protesters?
Well, it slightly depends who you ask. If you ask the government, they portray them as middle or upper middle class kids that are unhappy and opposition supporters. Just at the end of last year, Brazil had a presidential election. It was extremely close. It was pretty much half and half. Dilma Rousseff, the president, just got through. So the government now says those people are protesting are effectively bad losers, are the opposition. But if you go out on the streets, and CCTV teams have across Brazil, I don't think that's quite the full picture. You definitely come across people that voted for Dilma Rousseff at the end of last year, but are now extremely unhappy. And the key thing they're unhappy about, you mentioned in your introduction, is this scandal involving Petrobras, the huge state-controlled oil giant, and the scandal within it is absolutely spectacular. The numbers are phenomenal. You mentioned 3 billion. It could be as much as 10 billion. One particular single executive, not a particularly senior executive, has admitted to pocketing $100 million US, which he says he will pay back. And that is seen as obscene by many of the people that are trying to get on with their lives here at a time of austerity in Brazil.
Right, Stephen, we have the Petrobras scandal, but Brazil's economy is currently in the doldrums as well. What effect will these protests have on any kind of recovery efforts?
Yeah, I think that's right. You have to see this in the perspective of what is going on in Brazil and across Latin America, and that is the end of the commodities boom. Of course, China played a big part in that over the last decade. That's come to an end. All the governments here are having to sort of balance their books, including Brazil. And President Rousseff, very shortly after being re-elected, brought in some ideas of minimal but some austerity projects that she planned to bring in, cutting back some of the social welfare spending. Now, she's going to find that extremely difficult to bring in and to pass through Congress when this evidence of widespread corruption, including politicians, is coming out. People are not going to want to be told that there's less money going around when it's pretty obvious that plenty of money has been stolen by the politicians themselves. So if that happens, if the austerity can't go through, then a whole lot of other problems open up, including Brazil's investment grade rating being reduced. So it's a very, very difficult corner that the government's finding itself in.
And insofar as the corruption allegations are concerned, she has announced anti-corruption measures that she wants to take. How was that received?
Well, fairly lukewarm reception so far, that's right. President Rousseff did say that this is a country and this is a government that's going to have a kind of zero tolerance for corruption. But I think the key thing is what's going to happen. Amongst that Petrobras scandal, there are 100 politicians and executives involved. I think unless some of those are prosecuted and sentenced, presumably to long terms, then there's going to be real anger and further anger on the streets here in Brazil.
Very quickly, Stephen, is Dilma Rousseff going to survive?
Well, her popularity is right down to 13%, which is in a democracy is definitely in the sort of danger zone for any leader. But the impeaching her, the practicality of impeaching her, is extremely complicated. It requires a 2/3 majority in Congress. She still does represent the biggest party. So most analysts here think she's likely to survive, but she might well be this sort of lame duck president just months into the beginning of her second term.
Thanks, Stephen. That's CCTV's Stephen Gibbs talking to us from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil.